Thanks, Gail. That's great. So think about all those question details for Gail now. So that's a really interesting model they've developed. You see a lot of the consistent themes with, as she said, as they integrate with the balance of the ecosystem. Next up, why don't we have Peter? You want to go next? Talk about it from the health service provider perspective. And no doubt will be provocative, having heard him speak many times.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. I think probably the best way to frame this conversation and hopefully set up productive discussion is to really think about the key success factors that are really needed to develop a life sciences ecosystem. And I've made a few notes about that and thought about it a lot during my time here in Toronto. And maybe what I could do is just walk through what I see as 8 key success factors that are absolutely needed. First and foremost, great science and R&D. And when we look internally here in the city, we definitely have that. Certainly, as I've had the opportunity to interface with pharma executives who come here and they sit across the table and they say in an unsolicited way, we really see Toronto as number 3 in North America after the Bay Area and San Francisco in terms of the caliber of science and discovery. And so I think we have that box pretty firmly checked when we look around us here in Ontario. The second key success factor that I see is really academic partnership and strong universities. And when we look around Ontario, we've got universities like U of T and Waterloo as excellent examples of that. If we look on a broader scale, we can see the opportunities created. If you look, for example, at Stanford, MIT, Harvard, as great examples of how you can create ecosystems that evolve in settings where you've got a strong commitment of a university partner, you've got graduate students that create a pipeline for talent, you've got a business school that really creates entrepreneurial programs, and together the academic partner and the great science are absolutely needed. Third key success factor is tech transfer capability. And that it's absolutely important that resident within the university, or in our case, within the hospital, you need robust tech transfer capability and the ability of key individuals with knowledge, skill, and ability to interface with risk capital, with venture capital, in order to create the right connection and in order to really take great ideas and intellectual property and find ways to build business models around that to commercialize it. Next key success factor that I see as absolutely needed is infrastructure. And I think we're doing pretty well there. This building is a great example of that. This conference is another example of what happens when you can create the right kind of environment that really co-locates the university, in our case the hospital, industry partners, and creates an opportunity for us to come together in collaborative space. And so this type of environment that we see here, or other environments that could be created here, or what has been built in Waterloo, are great examples of the importance of infrastructure investment and really emphasize the importance of government in understanding the need for differential investment in key areas where that type of investment to create the right infrastructure will pay dividends over time by helping to build the right kind of ecosystem that we see developing here in Ontario. A next key success factor that we really need is executive talent. And in that area, we're not doing so well. What you're looking for there are individuals who know how to run startup companies, experienced biotech executives who know how to navigate the valley of death and who've had previous experience with high valuation exits. Most of those individuals love that type of work and get consistently recycled through a series of companies over time. And to get that talent here, we really need to capitalize on the real benefits of our city, the specific advantages that are created by the geopolitical environment that exists right now with Brexit and with Mr. Trump south of the border. And this really creates an opportunity for us to really attract the kind of talent here and to build EIR programs and embed those into a lot of the development of tech transfer offices and their capabilities. So we do need to really spend a lot of time understanding what is it that we need to do to bring the right kind of executives here. Some of you that have been to other jurisdictions know that if you go to a place like San Diego and you go to a restaurant, you can't help but bump into a biotech CEO who's running a startup company. We don't have that in our ecosystem here, and when you don't have the executive talent, you don't have the experienced people, the startup companies oftentimes can't flourish. The next key success factor that I certainly see is the need for government support. And we need the government at all levels, at the municipal level, at the provincial level, and at the federal level, to understand the importance of developing a strong life sciences ecosystem here. Each one of those levels of government plays an important role in terms of creating the right conditions for success. And at the federal level, there's a clear need to understand the importance of investment of R&D. Almost everyone in the room has seen Dr. Naylor's report. All of you are well aware, I believe, of how Canada is falling behind in R&D. We're behind other OECD countries right now. And when the federal government doesn't recognize the importance of that gap and doesn't formulate policy to close that gap, it really puts all of us in a very difficult situation where we have a lot of uphill work to do in a setting where the federal government doesn't put money behind R&D. We need to be able to engage government officials in intellectual conversations that look at data, that look at our investment in Canada in R&D, and look at critical issues like support for indirect costs of research. If we look at what's happened south of the border and we look at the strategic decision that the US government made after the Second World War to invest in the indirect costs of research, and now we look at what has resulted as a byproduct of that decades later, we can see universities and entire communities that are direct beneficiaries of NIH support in entire communities that really exist as a result of that strategic decision to support the indirect costs of research. When we look at that challenge here in the hospital sector, we can see that we have an extraordinarily high reliance on private capital to support the indirect costs of research. And that creates a degree of fragility in our ecosystem that is not sustainable over time or bears specific risks if you undergo a global financial crisis like we did in 2008. Most sophisticated private donors are looking for a government match, and they really need to be able to see convincingly that the government is going to match their own contributions to help us to develop a life sciences ecosystem. So we absolutely need to create the right conversations at the right levels in government to help them to understand their role in fostering innovation and to help them to understand that current government policy, which is really not to really formulate a strategic innovation policy, but to use blunt instruments like tax credits to support innovation. When we look at that SRED program as one example, that is a very blunt instrument that doesn't really help small companies thrive and flourish. And big companies that have the resources to capitalize on that get all the benefits. The right groups are not getting the benefit associated with a very blunt instrument to promote innovation. The last point, which is probably the most interesting one for us to reflect upon as Canadians, is our cultural risk aversion. And that holds us back in major ways, where we really are afraid of failing. We really have challenges at all levels in dealing with failure, and that really creates a degree of apprehension at many levels where decisions have to be made, and unfortunately cuts off risk-taking in situations where it's absolutely necessary if you want to create a Netflix or a Google of the future. And so I think that a lot of our conversation really needs to be structured around these 8 key success factors and how we can really look at accentuating the areas where we're already doing very well, where we've got an A on the report card, and looking at the gaps that we perceive and can honestly discuss, and really working collaboratively with government. If we look at Bill's role That by itself is a strong indication of provincial government interest in fostering innovation. But we really need to be able to navigate the secondary conversations at the federal level to ensure that we can get differential investment in infrastructure, the creation of the right kind of ecosystems around the right kind of university partners that we have across the country. And then together we can really fuel the innovation engine for Canada.
Good. Thank you, that's great. So there's a lot of good stuff there.